In 1991, the Dart Centre for Journalism and Trauma was established in the United States to assist journalism students in reporting on victims of violence with sensitivity, dignity and respect. Tonight we're joined by Dart's Executive Director, Bruce Shapiro. As an investigative journalist and commentator, Bruce has seen his fair share of trauma, whether it be in the back blocks of the Bronx or indeed in the chambers of the US Supreme Court. Now teaching investigative journalism at Yale University, Bruce draws on more than 2 decades of reporting for the likes of the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the BBC, CNN and Fox, just to name a few. He's the author of several books, some of which tackle the sensitive issue of the death penalty. Would you please make welcome to the stage our special guest for this evening, Mr. Bruce Shapiro.
Thank you. It is wonderful and inspiring to be here this evening. Thanks to the good people at the ABC, Radio National and Late Night Live. Australia is my second home as a journalist. So being asked to address the Quills is a great honor, and I thank the Melbourne Press Club for that. I'm also aware that, as an anonymous source in this room warned me, the Quills, and I quote, is a real old-fashioned journalism night of heavy drinking, backslapping, backstabbing, random fornication, and with luck, the occasional punch-up. Gary Tippett, did I get that right? I will try not to interfere with these traditional activities for any longer than necessary. It is seriously a particular and deep honor to be with you tonight because during last February's bushfires, the news professionals of Victoria, including so many of my friends in this room, set such a high standard for reporting this catastrophe in your own community. I say this as an American journalist for whom 9/11 was in my professional backyard, and as someone who had friends in New Orleans responding to Hurricane Katrina. I say this as someone who just returned from Haiti and a week of conversations with journalists whose studios and newsrooms were pulverized on January 12th of this year. And I say this as a regular visitor to Australia who watched Black Sunday from a distance with horror and concern as the work of my friends and colleagues as you contended with an emergency for which so few of us are ever prepared. I know from some of the words spoken tonight, and I know from my own experience, that for some of you, tonight is a kind of mixed celebration, evoking a moment when the crafts of journalism and the power of media organizations could not save the lives of many people. I know that for some of you, there are moments of great pride, as well as enduring deep frustration that you individually or collectively could not do more or did not avoid mistakes. I can only say that while there are undoubtedly lessons to be learned, and it is critical to learn them, it's also important to remember that in this moment of deepest crisis, the people of Victoria and Australia turned to you, and they did it because you long ago earned the people's trust. So, what should we talk about tonight after a year which brought such challenge to Victoria's and Australia's journalists, a year which also has been marked in Australia, as it has been in the US, by a continuing crisis in the news industry? Let me start by saying one thing that I will not talk about: citizen journalism. I hate this term. Not because the craft of journalism can't be learned and spread more broadly, but because citizen journalism implies the obverse, that journalists, the media, capital T, capital M, are a non-citizen tribe. I wish those who've hitched their wagons to the destruction of professional journalism could be nailed to a bar stool in the back room of tonight's Quills. In February of 2009, the citizens in this room, many of you with your own families, property, and friends at risk, put all your skill to informing your neighbors in the world of what was happening to channeling emergency calls, to connecting displaced families. No one else could do it. Whether you were cops reporters or wine critics or sports photographers, you knew your job in that moment. I remember shortly after Hurricane Katrina, walking into a little house in a ruined neighborhood of New Orleans, where a few reporters from the New Orleans Times-Picayune were camped out amid still high floodwaters. I was greeted there not by some adrenaline-addicted war correspondent, but by the paper's art critic and sports editor, who between them had led a small band of colleagues back into the heart of the storm. What they showed, and what this evening's awards amply demonstrate, practicing journalism is the fullest form, the fullest expression of citizenship. I'm also not going to talk about revenue models. We all talk about this a lot, and it's an important conversation. But journalism has always been an innovative craft, beginning when the technical innovation of the printing press collided with the political innovation of free speech. Today, if the only innovations we talk about are revenue models, we'll miss an enormous opportunity to refresh our sense of news and our ability to tell stories that defy cliché. So tonight, let's not go there. Let's talk instead about something I witnessed in Haiti among journalists whose homes and workplaces were pulverized by this year's earthquake. Aftershocks. You all know that following a great quake, the earth continues to release energy. In Haiti, the aftershocks come every few days and may continue for another year. But just as evident in Port-au-Prince and just as profound for Haitians are the psychic aftershocks that trouble sleep and waking. Searing memories that come unbidden. Reporter after reporter spoke to us of the roar of the earth, the cry of the people, the sharp stench of the unburied dead. Anxiety so profound that 6 weeks after the January 12th quake, many Haitians, even with intact homes or offices, find it impossible to sleep or work inside. And a sense for many, journalists, non-journalists alike, that the world as they know it has ended and may never return, that the wounds of January 12th will never heal. Traditionally, journalism has had little to say about aftershocks. We race to the earthquake or bushfire, the murder scene or the war, and know how to report it, how to ascertain facts and get quotes and make pictures. We do a good job, but then traditionally we move on. We move on to the next story, even as the aftershocks are just beginning to be felt, playing out in the lives of individuals, families, communities, nations for months or years. Over the last few decades, scientific evidence has begun illuminating a fact of fundamental importance to journalism and to all of us as journalists. People sustain psychological injury from life-threatening violence or cruelty. Individuals and communities can be changed, sometimes in fundamental ways, by the intimate violence of sexual assault or child abuse, or by the world-scale catastrophe of war or tsunami or fire. As journalists, our route to reckoning with aftershock is often deeply personal. It may follow covering a mass-scale disaster like the bushfires, or a single interview with a single rape victim that goes awry. It may be an assignment that leaves us feeling depleted or damaged, or for that matter, inspired in unusual ways that may be hard to explain to non-journalists. In my own case, my journey down this road began 15 years ago when I was covering American prisons and criminal justice policy for The Nation magazine. On a summer night, I became one of 7 people stabbed nearly to death in a random attack by a mentally ill man sitting a few feet away in a cafe near my home. I went from being a crime reporter to crime victim, and that forced a reckoning with my own craft, which continues to this day. I know that many of you in this room have had your own moments of reckoning and are part of an important conversation ongoing in Australia now about how to cover violence and tragedy and victims and survivors better. I'm very proud that DART Centre Australasia, based here in Melbourne, led by my friend and colleague Kate McMahon, has provided a forum for this ongoing reckoning. As journalists, we need to understand that aftershocks are news and find fresh ways of reporting so that the public can understand that tragedy does not end when mourners shovel earth into a grave or the cameras move on. This is not just a matter of writing more sensitive stories about individual psychological injury, resilience, or recovery, though that is valuable, important. It's also about, in a very hard and clear way, creating a trauma-aware news judgment, trauma-informed journalism ethics, a trauma-sensitive news agenda. When a mass shooting occurs at a university, how long is the shooter's self-photographed image newsworthy? And when does it become instead a source of injury to survivors and families and the public, outweighing any news value? When a region is devastated by bushfires, what lessons, conscious and unconscious, do residents and government learn? When a country is preparing to go to war, how relevant are the massive rates of post-traumatic stress disorder among a generation of American soldiers on repeat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan? The most important decisions our democratic societies make, whether about crime, public safety, human rights, war, are shaped by the public's understanding of violence and its consequences. As news professionals, we owe it to them. It is our job to illuminate the landscape of trauma as fully and accurately as we do how a bill becomes law or how prosperity can turn into recession. Journalism's reckoning with aftershock also means confronting the blunt facts of what covering these difficult stories can mean in our own lives as news professionals. Thanks to a handful of pioneering clinicians and researchers around the globe, including some here in Australia, we now know what should have been obvious. Journalists are a resilient tribe, but we are also vulnerable to psychological injury, no less so than firefighters, police officers, paramedics, or soldiers. And we need training. We need psychological support. We need leadership aware of these issues. The particular psychological injuries which can be inflicted by trauma, preventable injuries affecting memory, concentration, anger, empathy, have a particular significance for news professionals, at times undermining our basic zones of professional competence, isolating us from colleagues and friends, driving some to unnecessary personal risk or poor judgment that threatens colleagues. Let me speak bluntly to anyone in this room who remains a skeptic. I'm not talking here about creating a therapy-dependent newsroom in place of sharp-edged debate and frontline reporting. To the contrary, we're talking about smart, evidence-informed training for news professionals, solid peer support so that no one feels isolated or stigmatized by an accumulation of toxic assignments, and a culture of awareness among journalists and managers alike, ensuring that good news professionals are able to keep doing the most difficult stories and undertaking the most difficult assignments. Let's be honest. We all know colleagues whose careers have been derailed, not by some inherent weakness, but by an overload of images, sounds, and smells that no human being can easily metabolize. The old suck-it-up culture costs the careers of too many talented reporters. To me, this is a basic censorship issue. A good journalist who's sidelined because of debilitating emotional injury is censored as effectively as if she or he was wrapped in an orange jumpsuit and shipped off to Guantanamo. The good news is that leading news organizations like the ABC here and others around the world are now building innovative trauma awareness programs and peer support schemes and helping clinicians understand the special mission of journalists. Respected senior journalists, like many in this room, are speaking out, trying to end the stigma which has prevented our profession from contending with a serious occupational hazard. You can be proud that some of the great innovations in trauma training for journalists now emanate from Melbourne. Lessons I've learned from people in this room tonight have echoed in newsrooms throughout the US and Latin America and Europe and most recently Haiti. Let me circle back. I said that I wasn't going to talk about revenue models, and I won't. But of course, our profession is in a moment of great uncertainty. But here too, I think that trauma-aware journalism can offer a crucial perspective, and I'd like to share a few of what I think are important lessons that I've taken from colleagues over the Dart Center's 10-year history. From listening carefully to the survivors of crime, family violence, war, genocide, disaster, we understand something about persistence through dark and confusing times. From listening to clinicians and researchers and their insights into survivors and victims, we know how disabling a sudden loss of power and status can be, but also something about resilience, about the transforming power of community, mission, and story. From attending to one another as journalists, we are constantly reminded, I am constantly reminded, of how thrilling, innovative work can be crafted from the most challenging material produced amid the most daunting of circumstances. What we have learned from one another about covering trauma, and what we have learned from those we cover, including here in Victoria over the last year, has a new and special relevance to our embattled profession. Thank you.